Let me begin with just some reflections that I've had. I'm writing an essay on Christology in the 21st century. And I was reflecting. I know Richard Rohr is coming out with a new book in March on the universal Christ. And so he asked if I would contribute some reflections to his Wanting journal on Christology. And you know, the more I reflect on the very things we have inherited over the centuries and have woven into our religious DNA, the less, I think two things. One is we have so cemented what we have inherited into a form almost of an intractable form, you know, that to radically change these doctrines just seems quite unthinkable. And yet, Christology, certainly when we come to the person of Jesus and the recognition of Jesus as the Christ, that is within a particular understanding of the human person, a particular cosmology. And I thought to myself, and this is just sheer musings, what if we have about 99% of our Christology off the mark? Now, I know that sounds really radical, but, and believe me, I know, I mean, the person of Christ has certainly done a lot of good for many people, so I don't want to discredit faith here. But, you know, I was going back to that passage in Matthew and Luke and Mark where Jesus asked, you know, who do people say that I am? Yeah. You know, so the first thing is that recognition of Jesus as the Christ does not come from a dogmatic formula. It doesn't come from doctrine. It doesn't come from Chalcedon. It comes from the experience of Jesus. And so Peter says, you know, you are the Christ. And Jesus says, great, you know, upon you I'll build my church. Did he mean the church, you know, of Rome? I doubt it sincerely. Jesus was Jewish. He was, in a sense, felt called to kind of get that lost house of Israel, the tribe of Judah, back into some kind of human form. And so he says to Peter, I'll build my church in you. And then Peter, what he says in the next round, he says, oh, but I must suffer. I must undergo trials and tribulations. And Peter says, no way, you know, this can't happen. And he says, what? Get behind me, Satan. You're an obstacle to the ways of God. So Jesus, first of all, establishes the church based on this person that he calls the rock, and then he throws out that person. So isn't that really interesting? That what we call the church, you know, this intractable, unchangeable, almost immutable church, is within the context of the New Testament. It's quickly overturned, right? Mm-hmm. And so for Jesus, anything that stands in the way of God needs to, in a sense, becomes an obstacle to God. I think the idea is not to focus so much on whether or not Jesus is God, and is God saving us in Christ. I think these are important questions, but I'm not sure if they're the correct questions for a world in evolution. I think we have to first ask, you know, what is our experience of divine love? What is our experience of God? And how do we, where do we meet? Where do we encounter that experience? And then I think we need to ask, you know, what gets in the way of that experience of God's love in our lives? Because again, as I look at Jesus, I think he is a model in a sense. I mean, this is no great insight, but the humanity of Jesus is our humanity. So, you know, what's the significance there? Not that simply that God has become one of us, but that we have a capacity to change, for openness, and for a godlikeness that is not yet realized. And therefore, I think, how do we repackage this good news in a world of evolution, in a world of complexity, in a world of pluralities? And therefore, I think I would like to shift the conversation about who Jesus is from, you know, his natures of divinity and humanity to things like consciousness, creativity, cyborgization, in other words, the plasticity of Jesus, and ongoing evolution. And so I think, what if we were to just think about religion just in terms of consciousness, right? So it's really about coming, what gets in the way of a deepened consciousness? I think that's really an important question for us, and why, although taking some of the questions that were submitted here on prayer, and I think they're very good questions. In other words, what gets in the way of a deepened consciousness of God is everything, in a sense, that gets in the way of that relationship with God. So prayer in the sense of a mystical contemplative life, I think, is fundamental to a God relationship in the 21st century, but as it has been in every century. So I think in that respect, nothing new has changed, but we have sort of lost sight of the third eye of the heart, the inner dimension, and I think we have to reclaim that dimension for ourselves. Second is, I think, and here's where I think Christian life really could use a little bootstrapping. We do not take the life of Jesus as a creative life. We take it, we put the emphasis on salvation, what God is doing in Christ. And yet there's something about the humanity of Jesus that speaks to us very much like artificial intelligence today, right? That there's a capacity of nature to transcend itself. It can do radically new things. The humanity of Jesus did radically new things. In a sense, Jesus crossed, boundaries and did unthinkable things in his own time. And it's not so much what he did. I think our emphasis is on doing the unthinkable. And so it's telling us something about our human nature. We have the capacity to do things that we, are still yet unimagined. And I think that's part and parcel of a Christian, certainly from a Christian perspective, and here I would say, truthfully, all human perspective. And I think if we could live out of a new creativity and imagination, this question of non-duality would become less and less a question and more a way of life. And in this respect, I want to say that, what we're learning from science today is creativity is the name of the game, really. It's boundless, nature is boundless creativity. And so it's sort of alarming the way we box ourselves in to, it's a very subtle move that we make. We find ourselves locked into paradigms, we find ourselves locked into situations, even politically, at the moment, even looking economically at the moment, right? As we watch NASDAQ plunge and rise and plunge again. And we have to say to ourselves, is this it? Because I think this is where people are losing hope. They're going, this is it, it's all over. It's all a downward, I might as well just give it up. Instead of saying, wow, maybe there's something new going on here. Maybe we need to slow down, breathe in, and look at what is being created. What are the new things that are taking place in our midst? So I think Jesus is very much a paradigm of that. And I think Christmas is not, although I love, the newborn baby, but it's really about something radically new in our midst, and our call to radical newness. But we have to have, I think, a consciousness of newness, a creativity of newness, and therefore a trust of newness. In other words, there has to be an inner sense of trust that God will not fail us, that God is at the heart of this, and that God is drawing us on to something new. And in that respect, I want to say that I don't think, and as I look at the situation, and certainly in the Catholic Church today, I'm thinking to myself, really? Are we really just consigned and constrained by this church? Or is something new, are the seeds of something new in terms of church being born in our midst, but we haven't yet nurtured them into something, of what it can be. So I want to put those thoughts out there this evening, because as difficult as I see it, how complex life is today, clearly, that's not to be disputed, but that's not the end. That's really what I want to say here. I think we lose energy and we lose heart by boxing ourselves in to the paradigms we find ourselves in. When I look at someone like Jesus of Nazareth, the very thing he did was to break through his paradigms. He broke through difficultly, by the way. So all of this to say is, and I think there's another point for us when we talk about love. I get a little bit suspicious of love because it's not a sentiment of it's not so much a positive sentiment, although that's a very nice thing. I think when I look at the type of love that breaks through into a higher paradigm, it's a willingness to let go and to persevere into something new, into something more. And so in that sense, I think it is a type of cruciform love, a particularity of love, if I can put it that way. So can I open it to you this evening, those of you who are here? And I'd like to just hear some of your concerns and maybe some of your attractions to the Omega Center as well. What are you looking for? What deeply concerns you, and how might we, move together into a new future?
Well, Ilia, I would have to say that I think being confined to the parameters of the Catholic Church are an obstacle. I certainly am grounded in the Catholic Church, but it has not pushed me forward. Maybe I wouldn't be where I was if I didn't have a childhood grounded in the Catholic Church. But what I find much more growthful and motivating now are some of the philosophers, some of the scientists, and especially people who can synthesize the philosophy and the science with spirituality. And the main guide, I guess, for prayer is not a church-bound person at all, but he's an evolutionary. He's convinced, about evolutionary spirituality, and those I think I'm reading a book now by someone who is a philosopher as well as a meditation teacher, and it's called Radical Inclusivity, and he's talking about these paradigms that we're so locked into and why that's so natural to just relate to what we know without this, what you just said, without really being convinced that there's far more that what we know, what we don't know, than what we know. And he uses the example of standing under a street light, that whereby the light is the only possible clarity, whereas everything else is totally dark. But there's lots of reality out there in the dark. And I thought that was a very good example and illustration, that we just keep looking around under that streetlight kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you. I think what you're saying. I think a lot of people share your sentiments that the church itself, the institutional church, is no longer feeding the hungry heart, so to speak. And there is a lot we can learn from science and philosophy. And yet, I have to tell you that as someone who still remains committed to the church, I do think that, and here's what I'm trying to say through this all, there's something about the core, value of this institution we call the body of Christ that is more than what the institution itself holds at the present moment. In other words, there's a mystery here that while science and philosophy get at some of a deeper meaning of this mystery in terms of where we find ourselves in the world, there's a mystery of the God-world relationship as we can interpret that relationship in terms of Jesus as the Christ. I want to say that we haven't plumbed it enough. We haven't explored it enough. And here I think of mystics like a Raymond Panikkar or even Bruno Barnhart, in our own age, the elderly. The mystic is someone who really cuts through and enters through the deeper layers of this mystery of divine love, in incarnate love. And so I'm not ready to leave the church because I don't think the church itself is finished. I think that's what I'm trying to say here. I think it is itself a birthing process, if I could put it this way. The whole church truly is Christmas. It's incarnational. So I truly understand why people don't compute with it anymore. And yet, from where I sit, I am saying God is doing new things here. And I'd hate to miss out, truthfully, because God is really much more exciting when you get to the heart of God than even the best of quantum physics, which I really, really love. So I would, I guess what I would hope for is a patient, reflecting on mystery. We live in a very positivist age of science, and I think we're always looking for results. And I think the way God works actually is God is neither this nor that. I think God is right in the I think God is in the ambiguity of it all. And that's what makes it so difficult and so elusive, because you'd like some concrete results. Like, you'd like to see the world, for once, without war, and without hunger, and without, homeless. And there's something more here than the way we're thinking about things, if I can put it in that way. But I do appreciate what you're saying. So thank you. Anyone else want to?
Yeah, I do. I don't know where I'm going to go with my thoughts here. They're kind of like an entangled web of like dissonant ideas. But like
Can you tell me your name?
I'm Josh. I'm sorry, I'm Josh.
Oh, Josh, yeah.
Yeah, you were talking about neither neither this, neither that, and I was thinking, like, is there something that we can know about the forward moving edge of the church? Especially like, I mean, if you view nature, for example, it's like, you kind of view the environmental pressures that kind of, impose upon a species, and kind of like, desire, more desirable traits to move forward, for the, preservation of the species of itself. The mutants, for example, are the ones that are naturally selected, the forward-moving freaks. You could even say they're the resurrected one that kind of impinge from the future into the present, and kind of drag the species forward into a new modality of being. And I look at kind of like, the institutional church, and I think like, for example, it's not, the millennials are no longer really, attending mass as they used to. And the church numbers are declining. And there seems to be kind of like this new creative motif, like this new emergence of spirituality that is arising in different coalitions elsewhere. And I think the Hinduism, like, Hinduism kind of gave birth to Buddhism. And I wonder what Christianity is giving birth to in this moment itself. And if there are new kind of like nominal portions of the population, like these little marginal portions of the group that are kind of like operating from the future in order to kind of, like you say, the mystics, to give birth to this new creation of what could be a new institution in the present. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
No, that's interesting, Josh. I mean, I think two things. One, I think religion is the deepest core of all cosmic and biological life. And this is Teilhard's view, right? There's religion and evolution belong together. Like religion, in his view, is the overflow of the free energy of cosmic biological life. So there's something about religion that speaks to the transcendent nature of nature, right? So we constantly are reaching out beyond ourselves. We're constantly reaching out towards what is not yet attained. If I were to just say, what will religion be like, say, in 1,000 years or 2,000 years, which is not a very long time in our Big Bang universe, I could really see, and here's where I think technology actually may play a positive role for us. I can see a new type of person emerging in and with technology. And I think if we could begin to emerge in a new type of person that sees religion less institutionally bound, maybe a whole new understanding of religion as a core dimension of personal, communal, and collective planetary life. That we wouldn't box religion into tribes. You know, I think maybe what I'm saying is I think we need to, and we will. I really do think we will move, because we're beginning to see this, beginning to move beyond tribes of religions.
Yeah.
And I think a new type of religious consciousness, which already has begun, I think a new type of religious consciousness will continue to emerge. And all I'm saying, when we use the language of the Christ, I'm not thinking here that everyone's going to be Christian. That language is a symbol of kind of in the Polycarp notion, that the symbol of unity, you know, that we have a symbol that, and that same symbol can be, it can be in the language or, you know, thought of other traditions as well. But we need symbol, we need myth. We don't have a new myth. One of our problems today is we don't have a new myth or narrative, right? So
Yes.
Our religious narrative is narratives, right? So someone was talking about quantum physics and evolution and psychology. We have little bits of this and that, you know, all giving us meaning. What we don't have, and what we need to, in a sense, construct, you know, moving forward, is a narrative that, you know, we can engage in together, whether we're Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, secularist, but a religious narrative, you know, believe it or not. I mean, and so it seems contrary to the way we've been brought up with religion, but I'm saying we need to rethink religion from the ground up. We need, and all the things that make religion a gravitas for us, right? Not something of a duty, but something of a force, something that is empowering and enkindling and moves us, you know?
Do you mind if I, sorry.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask you if that includes like an inter-independent narrative, or like where all the religious institutions retain their particularity while being unified into a broader meta-narrative of the whole?
Yes, I do think so. I do think there's a great richness of the religious traditions. I always say, I don't think God is really that boring, quite honestly. one way, you know, really. Bonaventure once had this wonderful saying, and I forget, it's in one of his sermons. He says, the fullness of Christ is in the diversity of its members. So the diversity, and this is Teilhard, right? Union differentiates. It's actually the fullness of unity is in the richness of plurality in a unified way. Not in a richness of opposing pluralities, but in a richness of unified pluralities. And I think what we see today are opposing pluralities, and what we long for are unified pluralities. That we can, in a sense, be enriched by the tremendous wisdom and rituals and symbols of the various religious traditions. And from a Christian perspective, to me, the moving towards that unitive consciousness of the rich plurality of different ways would be, for me, the fullness of Christ. You know, that would be moving towards the fullness of the Christ. And this is where I think we're really off the mark, you know, in trying to preserve something like this lonely figure of Jesus Christ, you know, as if this is it. Poor Jesus, I think, oh my gosh, you know, and as if, I mean, and insensibly that we really think that, you know, Muslims and Jews and Buddhists really have to convert to Christianity to be quote unquote saved. I mean, that's just outrageous, I think, you know, in our own day and age to think this way anymore. So it's unhealthy. I think it is unreconcilable with the world as we know it. And I think it's time to move into a new paradigm of religious consciousness.
I'd like to say something. Can you hear me?
Yes. Just identify yourself so I know who you are.
I'm Linda Colosi.
Linda.
And
okay.
I'd like to speak to that mystery and the consciousness, because my own personal experience is coming from the inside out. I came from Judaism and did not have a language or an understanding of Christianity at all. I had an inner experience of what I was calling upon the one God, whatever that meant, and asked, who are you? Where are you? I want to know the truth. And began to sit and listen and have experiences of revelation that convinced me that there was something beyond myself that I didn't understand, but was very real. And my experience of coming to the Omega Center is to be, and also with the religious community, because I have been an associate with a religious community and have worked with, over the past 18 years, with a religious community, and I have found community that was different, and yet opened me more and more to understanding the diversity as well as the unity. I have 2 children. One is very Jewish and thinks his mother's a little nuts. The other, it came to understand and be curious as to who this mother was, and came to have his own religious experience of Jesus. And he is now in an evangelical, teaching in an evangelical college at Wheaton College in and he's teaching them about Judaism, and he's in an Anglican church. And very active with his children, with his 5 children in an Anglican church. And I've found that from the beginning of his transformation and his evolution, I've watched how what I would now call the Holy Spirit worked in him to grow and understand and embrace otherness, because I was really out there for him. And what I was believing in Catholicism for him when he began was, evil. And then he, the more he came into the Anglican Church, the more he began to understand Catholicism. And he opened to much more than he was familiar with before. And I'm just fascinated by the mystery of how it continues to evolve. And as of Friday, I am changing everything. I mean, I'm at a juncture in my own life. I have no idea what's going to unfold, because I am retiring from where I am, and I'm going to take 2 months and listen and just rest and relax and listen.
So very interesting in terms of, it's a sense, almost religious pluralism there, Judaism from Christianity, a little bit evangelical, but there's an openness there, to where God is, and that's how God does work sometimes in very, very strange ways. And so that's the beauty, I think, of following the religious call today is less to be worried about, is this the right path? Then, does this path bring me to a sense of God in my life, a sense of a deepening of life, a sense of, a goodness of life that's helped me contribute to the overall fecundity of life? And so I think, however that path unfolds, I think what we say today within a religious pluralistic context is that it's not the path per se, that it's the path that leads to light. That's, in a sense, I think, is what's important here. So I would say, wow, congratulations, and keep up the good work. So I think that's, again,
I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry, it's Jerry. I'm from Winnipeg. So I'd just be interested, Sister Delio, in regards to the comment you made about the narrative.
Yes.
And was wondering if perhaps you might be interested at some point in time in having another one of these video conferences that would just focus around that. And because I find myself in a situation where we are in a community here in Canada where you've been, and
Yes.
and so in Winnipeg, where many of us have been involved in Catholic healthcare, our dioceses, and now many folks in all sorts of walks of life, and coming together, and I'd say quite a number of them within our city are talking about this narrative.
Yeah.
And the importance of it. And in particular myself, because
Yes.
we all bring something different to the how. And so, but I'd say it's early stage, and we're sometimes drawn back to these frameworks that have been set up. So
Yes.
within the church, we have these boundaries of the church in healthcare, and we've lived in Canada some very difficult times going through it. And as a result, I would say some of what has been sort of deeper, darker secrets and fears have come out.
Yes.
And so we've had to learn how to walk through this, and where do we go with it, and so on and so forth. But in the midst of it is still sometimes this pullback to go back to our ego ways of working.
Yes.
And not recognizing it. So the fact that, to me, it's coming back together in ways that we can be in the dialogue we have around something like narrative.
Yes.
As part of where we need to go. So I'm just sort of saying, I think you're onto something big, and I think it could be interesting and challenging. And today I was with an individual who, that's what we wound up talking about. And his words that he used, I'd bring him and say, well, I use a different words. I use spirituality to what you said. And he said, well, of course it's there. I just use these other words. And I go, that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
That so he talked about anagram and different programs and other things.
Right.
And he just made it more, how can I put it? Grassroots, bottom up.
Yeah.
Like how people would talk.
Yes. Right. I understand.
And I found that quite interesting.
Yeah. Great.
So anyways, so we're going to have more discussions and dialogue, and a number of people want to get together. So I'm just sort of saying it would be great to have some people who have knowledge and bring different wisdom. And obviously, when you've come to Winnipeg, you do bring a lot of wisdom. You talk about contemporary mystics and so on. Well, you are one. We all know it, but we don't talk about we don't say it or talk about it when you're there.
Yeah. Well,
and by the way,
hi, I'm a mystic.
And by the way, I want to congratulate you for stepping into the arena with some of what you've written, in particular since August. And I can tell you that some of it's getting around, some of it's circulating in ways that one wouldn't think. And it is enabling dialogue in a more open fashion, because, somebody said this. Well, guess what? I think the same way, but I'm able to use Sister Delio, or somebody comes up and says, I'm now sending you something from this Jesuit priest who's in the Vatican. And guess what he wrote? And so I'm finding more and more individuals who are recognized within the church as kind of stepping into that arena. So I just want to say thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. It's always been my belief that real reform comes from the bottom up, that it does not really come top down.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of my work and a lot of the Omega Central work is really just that. It's really trying to, when I say reform, I mean really coming to a whole new narrative, a whole new understanding of, and we have to, in a sense, build bottom up. I mean, we can't just, and this is the difficulty of the question of narrative, because the stories that we have told for so long have been constructed over a very long period of time with a number of different elements, right? And so we have just gotten used to those, you know, those stories of Jesus and salvation and original sin and all this kind of stuff. And we learn those stories as if they were never to be questioned, you know, that this was the story.
Right.
And now we realize today that, you know, narratives are constructed and deconstructed. And they're constructed, and we need a narrative, right? We are storytellers, and that the stories we tell are that which makes the meanings of our lives. And I think today, the thinning out of meaning is because we don't have any gripping narrative that really pulls us into, you know, we have the, you know, the postmodern thing, like your story is not my story type thing, like I'm really to you, you know. And yet, I think if we do careful work, we will be able to begin to find common elements. I think you said we may be using different language, you know, and at times, but some of that language is pointing to some deeper realities that we're sharing together.
Yes.
And so that's what we have to, and that's both scholarly and it's both popular. You know, we have to begin to hone in on what are those common elements. And here, my own approach to this has been, because this is how the ancients did it, right? What does nature tell us, right? Because nature is a book, right? We learn a lot about ourselves as nature from nature. And so just the Greeks did. And so, you know, I think when we go back to the early church, they had particular notions of nature from the Stoics, from Plato, from Aristotle, but we have not done the work in our own time. We have allowed modern science to become a very elitist type of discipline with its own language, and we enjoy the comforts of science, but we have never integrated what do we now know from nature about our nature. So I think, you know, and here again, I think, you know, the very fact that we do evolve, I think evolution cannot be, again, marginalized here. We are in evolution. That is just whether we like it or not, or whether we're comfortable or not, we will continue to complexify. And that's a given. I mean, that's not maybe not. It is actually how nature will continue to move forward. So we have to get our heads around. If we don't like the word evolution, if it bothers us, then use the word complexification. You know, use something that will, you know, enable us to realize that we don't stay the same. We literally do not. And that has to be part of our narrative. We do not stay the same. You know, there's an openness here. And so I think we have to shift part of our thinking from what is to what is becoming, because the becoming part is as important as what exists already. And we put too many dots into what exists now and not enough emphasis on the like, what is it that lies up just ahead of us that we're actually giving credence to in some way. So thank you for that. I will continue to think about narrative, and I think the Omega Center actually, one of the things that Teilhard really struggled with was precisely that, trying to create a new religious narrative for evolution. And I think, you know, his big picture story is an attempt to say that God and world are not opposites; they're a complementary pair. That, you know, that there's a power in our midst that's moving this evolutionary process towards greater wholeness. So Teilhard did really spend a lot of time, not in a very systematic way, because he wasn't a systematic theologian; he was a scientist, you know. But we have a lot to mine, I think, in Teilhard for developing a new narrative for a world that is in evolution, that is religiously and ethnically and culturally pluralistic, and that is increasingly becoming technologized. And we're going to have to deal with the fact that we are cyborgs and that we will continue to be cyborgized, and that's not marginal to us, that's integral to what we are and what we're becoming. And so that's the funny thing about religious people. They tend to put stuff like technology or science to the sides, you know, in this quest for God. And I'm saying, oh no, God actually loves that stuff, you know, and is working quite well through it. So we need to grapple with that, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question, Ilia.
Yes, please, is that Gertie?
It's Gertie.
Or-
Yeah, hi.
Yes.
Hi. Well, you know, when you're talking about narrative, I think about our liturgies. You know, most people thinking about the Catholic Church is where they learn most about their faith is through our liturgies. So I wonder if you have anything to say about how can our liturgies be evolutionary?
Yeah,
You know,
no, it's a really good picture.
what
We have a
stories are we
liturgist with
telling?
us this evening.
What's that?
And I still want to see if he's still there. Andrew.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know you're listening. Let me give my 2 cents and I might pass it over to you, Andrew, to see if you have, see what you're thinking. I mean, Taylor did say that our mode of worship is not consonant with an evolutionary paradigm, and he had a few things to say that, I mean, and we know that worship gathers us in and then sends us out, and I think, what are we doing in that gathering in? Are we empowered for a world of creativity, complexity, evolution? Are we empowered to transcend where we are in new ways? And I don't think so. I think a lot of the liturgy is still, focused a little bit transcendent, in the sense I still hear a lot of language here in DC of heaven and earth, as two separate spheres of existence. I still hear a lot of talk about original sin, about Adam and Eve, and I'm thinking this is crazy, because Adam and Eve died like a long time ago, and original sin is no longer really original. It's what we learn from biological evolution is that a lot of it is not original, that it just is passed on. So we need to rethink. I mean, sin is real. I mean, I don't want to spend. I mean, what brokenness, however you want to call it, we don't get things right, and we do a lot of harm to one another and to the earth. So we can't just throw that out. And yet, how do we make sense of a world that's unfinished? And how do we have a liturgy for an unfinished universe? We have a liturgy for a finished universe, and that's a lot of our problem. What might an unfinished symphony look like for a liturgy? What would unfinished music look like? What would unfinished prayers look like? What's an unfinished God look like? So, I think that would take a radical, oh my God, we think we have problems now in the Vatican. Talk about redoing liturgy for an unfinished universe. We're just, but that's okay. I think at some point, maybe Andrew, you would have thoughts here.
Well,
who does do these things?
Yeah, last evening I was doing a evening of recollection with some of our Augustinian friends at Villanova, and one of the things that I mean, one of the most basic things, and you've touched on it, is the language is simply impossible to work with. Because I said to them, if you really ever started seriously listening to what we're praying, it's material heresy. For example, in this, I mean, these beautiful O antiphons, come, all right? Well, God is always there. If the language actually is flipped, the language that's talking about God is really about us, that we are coming to God.
Right.
So I mean, so just
in terms of waking up, consciousness,
right. So that first, and then the other piece that you just mentioned, that is though we're just here. We're here in the world just to kind of springboard ourselves into, eternal life, meaning not what the New Testament meant, but that this heaven beyond. So just on the level of its theology, not to speak of its almost complete lack of poetry, but in the 5 years that I was at St. Norbert College, I really didn't do much with liturgy at all, but was moving much more into the contemplative, like maestro art, etc. Which has helped me to realize that part of the failure of the liturgical renewal is that it's supposed, this is what I think the monks were best at, that it's supposed to be grounded in a contemplative experience that is, that is coming to birth in the liturgical act. So,
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
appreciate that, Andrew. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, to get back to Gertie's point, here's what I think. I think, a lot of liturgy was constructed when the laity were illiterate. If you think, go back to the Middle Ages. So
Right.
it's basically a liturgy for illiterate people.
Yeah.
And so now we have very literate people. We have professional people. We have thinking people.
Right.
And it's like, oh gosh, they're thinking, and now they're questioning things.
Right.
Well, duh. So I think I do think we need a radical revisioning of
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and why not build a built-in creativity to liturgy that it meets the needs of where we are in this present age and can be open to change as our understanding of things shifts. We have, again, like our narratives, we structure these things ontologically constrained and bound. And we have locked ourselves into paradigms, and we're suffocating under them. And what all I'm saying very simply is that we now realize that, and now we have to do the hard work of lifting ourselves up and constructing new paradigms that allow an openness and ongoing creativity. And that goes for liturgy and how we
absolutely.
So it's tough because you have to, in a sense, go against. In a sense, you have to deconstruct, what exists in order to reconstruct something that is viable. But I would agree, Andrew. I think the contemplative dimension. And I think this is what we see. Certainly, Richard Rohr and Thomas Keating. Those who have really devoted themselves to deepening that interior dimension of human existence and cosmic life. I think that is the vital part. I think without that interior dimension, we cannot really go forth, in a sense, go forth in a way that we have a sense of that not that we're in control, but that we're part of something, that we're participating in something that's dynamic and vital. And not being, we're not surviving here, on this lonely dying planet, which it is because I think of very poor, religious understandings, or that we have to, in a sense, take all because God only knows it might all blow up tomorrow. We should just make sure we have our, take care of ourselves and our families type thing. And this kind of thinking, which I do think underneath that are these deep Christian principles of original sin and fallenness, and, there's this kind of, that kind of thinking really has pervaded a lot of Western thinking, which has in turn pervaded a lot of global thinking. And so I think we're in serious layers of old thinking. That really today.
Can I just add something to this too? I was thinking, religious women have been praying together, doing liturgies together for eons, because we always had to create our own. So we've already got women that are doing this.
Oh, yes.
All over the place, because we, unless we had the nerve to sit to do a mass together,
well,
we created our liturgy.
Right? And thanks. Tell me your name again.
Gertie.
Gertie. Gertie. Oh, I didn't know it was you, Gertie. So the thing is, women have been doing this, and yet women are still marginalized in the church, and still marginalized in the culture. You don't have to go to the church. It's still a very patriarchal cultures. So we have a lot of patriarchy in the world. The world, in fact, I think right now what we are really looking at is some of the last vestiges of patriarchy. The systems are falling apart because patriarchy no longer works. We're in an evolutionary world where the lines of convergence outweigh the lines of patriarchy. And what we see are the resistances of the patriarchal systems against these lines of convergence. But give enough time and the patriarchal systems will fail, they will die out. And then our call then is, where will we be? Are we on the side of creating something new, or are we going to be just sort of like, going down the mudslide, as the systems fail? And I want to say, as a Teilhardian, we must be on the side of convergence, that we are part of what is emerging. That means risk-taking. That's about as simple as it gets. And so, Gertie, thanks for, women have been risk-taking for a long time, but I think we all have to be risk-taking. By taking risks, doing new things, writing new prayers, talking about God in new ways, talking about religion in new ways, being in a new way. And everything about us should not cling to the old, but should be, in a sense, resting on the future. And I think we need persons who are resting on the future as our hope. Yeah.
Ilia, could I add something?
Yes.
This is Ben.
Oh, hi, Ben.
Hi. So on that, adding on to that, I guess in thinking about this new narrative or religious narrative for evolution and searching for what's new in our midst, and then in thinking about, you could think about it on a microcosmic level of the church, it seems like, sure, it's going to be from the ground up, but it almost has to be from outside as well. Like, I don't think the church is just going to renew itself on its own. Something has to break into that into that realm. And I think to come up with some of these new narratives, I think we have to engage other people who are in the same evolving consciousness or at the edge of our evolution of consciousness. So engaging there are scientists who are having what would be the analogous conversation that this group, who's more, quote, religiously oriented, and these types of groups need to be engaged with one another and not in our own realms. I mean, the Mega Center is wonderful, but we also have to invite others into conversation.
I think that's really true. Yeah,
it's finding those people. It's happening everywhere. Economics. I mean, and I think that's just our leading edge of consciousness is seeping into our antiquated institutions or corroding them, or however you want to put it. But and how to do that though in the date, like I'm not sure like how to bring people together, because there's people in science that are talking about new science, talking about the sacred and how science can inform us, even the study of astrobiology and astrophysics, and they're all hungry like this group is, and it's for the same thing, I think. And how do we come together? And because that is why we do need, quote, church or the body of Christ. We still have to do this together.
Absolutely.
We're not going to figure it out in our living rooms by ourselves.
I agree. You're in a sense representative of what is needed on a larger scale, right? I think an interdisciplinary dialogue of deepening depth that renews the sacred, the meaning of the sacred in our midst, a meaning of another dimension that's not just consciousness, but what we call the religious dimension. In other words, consciousness that reaches out to the ultimate depths of things. So I think one thing we could do is, certainly for the Omega Conference, is to really shape that around, deep dialogues between scientists, psychologists, and religious thinkers. And I think we need to hone that. I mean, we do hope to have a conference in November of 2019.
Great.
So, so hi, Greg.
Hey, Ellie, I just wanted to add on the tail end of Ben's question. Ben, we're going to be relaunching the website, actually, by the end of March. And the reason I'm mentioning that here is that we're going to have the publication aspect of the site broken into 3 main sections. One of those sections will be called Omega Mind, most likely. And that section will bring in different disciplines and different ideas and different traditions as is necessary. Because we definitely believe that in order to understand the whole, as Ilia would say, the Catholic, according to the whole, that notion of Catholicism, we have to bring in these ideas from different areas. It can't just be about theology. Theology can be sort of the queen of the sciences again, because we have, in a sense, we're offering this new narrative of depth, of wholeness, of unity in diversity. But we need to bring in these different insights in order to do that. So that will be a huge focus of what we're doing at the end of the quarter.
And if I could just add one more thing, Ben, to what you're saying. I mean, as a teacher, a lot of what I'm doing now, both in my graduate and undergraduate classes, is bringing a lot of the new paradigm, a new way of thinking about religion and sacred depth and God and science together. And I can't tell you how many students say to me, oh my gosh, I've never thought about things this way. Or I thought, I never heard anyone talk about religion and evolution like you do. And so what I'm saying is we have an opportunity to, in a sense, educate younger generations for a new religious consciousness for a new world. And that's really exciting. because once they catch on, they want to know, well, how can I move in this direction? How can I deepen this?
Right. I mean, we talk about millennials leaving a church, but they're leaving a church that's dead.
Yeah.
Exactly.
In
They
my
haven't
opinion,
left
and they don't
religion.
have anywhere to go. So
Exactly.
I
Right.
hope I don't
And
offend
so
anybody
I
by
see,
saying that, but
yeah, and I'm saying there's a whole minefield here of depth and meaning and wanting to be part of community, ecclesia, church in a whole new
yeah.
way. And so that too must be part of the new narrative.
And they
we're
may be the
losing.
ones that have the narrative.
Yeah.
Well, if you listen to them,
or they
they
certainly
really
have part of
do.
it.
Yes, we write younger generations off like that, like they don't care, and that is so not true.
Right.
They deeply care.
Yeah, they do.
And you need a new language and new symbols, new structures to meet where they are, and you bring them in and you find, wow, God, I mean, this power of love that we call God is really doing creatively new stuff in their lives. So it's very exciting, but we will definitely, and as Greg said, keep an eye on the website, because we will be redoing the website to meet some of the needs that you're talking about.
And are you open to different conversation partners? And where would we make some recommendations about those?
Yeah, so our conversation partners right now would be Center for Action and Contemplation, Richard Rohr's group, Contemplative Outreach, Integral, Bruce, who's Bruce up there in Canada?
Sanguine.
Bruce Sanguine, yeah. Bruce Sanguine's group.
Yep.
And we're open to dialogue partners. I mean, in other words, those visionary, evolutionary, visionary thinkers who are, in a sense, with, help us widen, in a sense, the vision and the narrative. And I'm also very interested in psychology. I think psychology is the one area we kind of marginalize. And I think there's a whole, there's a whole group there. I think we need to bring in. Evolutionary psychology would be very interesting as well.
So would we email you suggestions for some context?
Could you please email me, actually? Yeah, anyone has any ideas, please feel free to email me at any time. I'm happy to chat with folks. And thank you everyone for participating in the survey, by the way. That was very helpful. That's giving us a lot of direction for the website. If anyone ever wants to chat with me or has ideas for us, please reach out. I'm very happy to hear them. So thank you.
Yeah, Greg is really tremendous in many ways. He has a lot of vision for the Omega Center, but he's also very technological. So he actually can do the very things that we hope to do, which is kind of amazing. But all I want to say is, we're living, remember the old Chinese saying, we live in interesting times, not to be underestimated, right? We're living, I think, we have the opportunity to, I think, remake, and when I say remake the world, to really, in a sense, recreate the world. Now, that sounds very idealistic and very large, but we know that ideas do change things, right? We know that people who are empowered are transformative. And so I think what I want to say to us is that never underestimate the power of your life and the power of God in your life. That we're called into greatness. We're not called into mediocrity. And I do think sometimes we just fall for mediocrity, and we kind of get placated and we get thinned out. We find our energy sort of worn out. And I'm really saddened by that, because I think every moment really does count. Every breath counts, every encounter counts. It makes a difference how we live in a conscious awareness of the moments of our lives. And so what I think is, and people always ask me, are you worried about the church coming, and I have to tell you, absolutely not. I mean, that's like the very last thing I ever worry about is the Vatican calling me up. I'd love to have a conversation. I mean, honest to goodness, it's just so funny, but I must be my Sicilian side. I have no idea, but that is just really, I have to say, the very, very last thing that I ever think about. And I am like, if we have to post 97 theses on a wooden door someplace, then we should do it. We need to be radical. And I think we're not radical enough in our loves. We're not radical enough in our actions. And that doesn't mean we have to go do big things. We have to do little things with radical love.
Yeah.
And we have to think differently. That's, we get locked into paradigms of not just old thinking, but sort of downward negative thinking, where the news feeds on negativity. It breeds sensationalism and emotionalism, and we get caught up in that stuff. And I'm saying this is the discipline we need in our own time. We need to know when to let that stuff go. And we need to know that we can be creating something as an alternative, for a place that we call world that we grow into. So I think, and I hope that the Omega Center will continue to grow in terms of not just numbers, but I mean depth and breadth of participation, that we're in something. And here's where science does say to us, we are wholes within wholes, right? We're part of something that in a fundamental levels, I think we'd be shocked to realize how just integrally related we are to one another around the planet. And so we need to live out of that new consciousness. What does that look like? How do we go about our daily jobs with the consciousness of a holistic consciousness, As for religion and the church, I would say I would not worry so much about structures of church. I would be concerned coming to a new understanding of God and of a new understanding of divinity in our midst. I mean, what is this incarnation thing at all? I find it really scandalous, quite honestly, and radical. So it's, it's kind of ludicrous to think that God would be completely immersed here. And yet that is the great mystery, and so what kind of God is this that we're talking about, And here I would say this is not really exactly the same God, as Krishna. This is not the same God that, or the same light maybe that Buddha. Maybe it is and maybe it isn't, but all we know is that, from a Christian perspective, this is a really scandalous thing. I mean, and why would divinity of absolute love want to have anything to do with human beings who are so, look at us. I mean, look who we vote for president, why would God want to become one of us? So those are the questions I think we have to ask, and we have to engage. I really do think, quite honestly, my own 2 cents, I don't think God is fully God yet,
Right.
I know it's a radical statement, but I think a lot of God's godness really does need us. And that's a scary thought from my perspective. But I really do think there's something about the incarnation, that mystery we haven't fully entered into. But to realize that the godness of God is contingent on what we become in our lives. Wow. So I would say, enter into this great mystery unafraid and unbridled. Be as scandalous as you can, and as daunting, and just kind of move without too many boundaries around you and too many questions. Endless questions, Bonaventure said, gets us entangled. We get entangled in our questions, and then we wind up in the dark. We no longer can see the light, because one question is leading to another question, to another question. And here's where I do think, the great mystical insight is to just be, just to be in that question, to be in the unknown, to be in the ambiguity. That's the beauty of it, that I can delight in ambiguity, that I can delight in the unknown, in the unknown dark. I don't understand a lot of people. I don't understand women in my community. I don't even understand myself, quite honestly. But I know that I revel in the fact that I don't feel alone. And I think a lot of our experience today, there's a feeling of loneliness, of being cut off, of being abandoned. And I think to myself, how did we get to this state of feeling abandoned, when again, as a Christian, very faith claim is that God is with us? Really? Do we really believe that? I mean, 100%, and then what does that mean for us? Would we really do, some of the stuff we do or say? So I just think we're at a fantastic moment in cosmic history. And my invitation to us is, let go of whatever that past was. It's over. the past brings us to the present, and we live in the radical openness of making a decision, you know, and a lot of our lives is really about decision making, you know, but the decision not of a frantic, oh, what will I do? A decision out of a contemplative beingness, you know, a contemplative dwelling in. And so I do think of ourselves, I don't think of the human person as something solidly built, but rather as a quantum event. We're particles and waves, you know, and I think a lot of our lives are constantly moving between wave and particle, and, you know, maybe we're always coexisting as wave particle. And so there's a dynamism to what we are, you know, and I think if we could live out of a consciousness of that dynamism, we find ourselves less embroiled in unresolved conflicts. So I don't know if this is at all helpful to you, or if you have any other questions or deep concerns that you'd like to share this evening.
I wanted to give John a chance to chat. I
Oh, yeah,
think
I could
his
just-
digital hand up a few times.
Oh, John, sure, please, come on in. John?
He's muted.
I'm
he's
on
muted.
him if he has not.
John's
John,
John Farrow?
All right, there. It helps when I unmute.
Okay.
Yes. I've been, I think, engaged in contributing to a new narrative. I've been teaching a class at my Anglican cathedral from within, because I come from an approach of self-study and theoretical physics, philosophy, and theology for about 50 years. And a lot of my narrative is based on evolution, both from Bergson, from Teilhard, and from Robert Pirsig, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and
yes,
Quality. So I've been teaching this sort of new narrative of an expanded rationality that goes beyond the limitations of scientism and teaches what I've been given to call inspirationality. And in this narrative, I emphasize the marvelous concept and imagery that Teilhard gave us of the Omega, the risen Christ.
Yes.
And that the risen Christ, the atonement, all of those are an essential part of my Christology. I can't do without the uniqueness of Jesus, not just his incredible humanity, but his unique divinity as the fulfillment, the Omega point. And I envision that I teach from a physical point, that supremely attractive center. I teach evolution being driven by the Logos, which I see as the Holy Spirit as well as the Christ, the Word. And I teach this physical field of attraction between the tangential and that supremely attractive center. And I teach that center is the literal and physical consummation of creation. That is the new creation. That is the fulfillment of creation, in which all that we see tangentially is not just redeemed, but but made new and made good. I love the imagery of the Lord of the Rings. The ring was cast into the mountain and was unmade. All that is we feel wrong with creation, wrong with our world, wrong with ourselves, is in that consummation of creation unmade. All the sorrow, all the hurt, all the injustice is unmade. And that seems remotely distant to us in our tangential time, but it's present to us sideways in time. And I'm trying to teach the people in my class how to live in that presence and feel the reality of that consummated creation.
Yeah.
Cool.
So you have a lot there. I mean, and I think a lot of what you're saying is, in a very nice way, is what we have held in terms of the risen Christ. And I do think, what we are saying is that our humanity is taken up into God in a new transformed way. And I like your notion of being unmade. In other words, all the hurts, all the sorrows. And the question is now, how do we live? So this question of living in the risen Christ is really an important one for us, right? So what we are saying from a Christian perspective is that all that we hope for has in some way been already attained or achieved, right? And yet it's not yet fully realized. So, in the classic notion of the reign of God is broken in, but it's not fully realized. It's not yet. And so I think in some ways what we're saying is a lot of Christian spirituality, and I think a lot of Jason's life is really coming to a whole new level of consciousness. I do think, it's coming to a new awareness as a knowingness as a deepened love. And that responsive love has to be somehow enacted in the fullness of our lives, right? So it's sort of an integral package of personhood. Yet I have to say, in the resurrection, it's what we hope for and what we believe. And I don't think that that's a static resurrection. I think resurrected life, it's a very dynamic, right? So so that notion of the unmade, or that which it has been not fully formed, now yet finds its fullness of form and completion in God, and yet is always open to, excuse me, always open to, thank you. See, and here's where I wonder, is risen life a joining into that endless, boundless, creative love of God, in that openness to the ever fullness of life. I always love the Cappadocian Father Gregory of Nyssa said, no one can see God and live. So the ever, even as we approach God in that, consciousness and movement towards risen life, we never really fully arrive at God, because God is always the more of anything that we can ever attain or achieve. And so there's something very dynamic there. Actually, I'm hoping to write a book this coming year on rethinking the Trinity as quaternity, not in terms of numbers, in terms of the symbolism of numbers from 3 to 4.
Yes.
and the openness of the 4. Oh. So stay tuned. But thanks, John. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is Michael Begum in there? Or Pam? Is Pam Begum in with us?
I saw Michael on there. Let's see if he's still on.
Did he give up?
He may have logged off. I don't see him on here.
Okay. Yeah, it is. Is it 8:30 already?
Yeah.
I'm sorry about the late start here. Is there any other anything else we can address this evening before we?
Could I ask a question, Ilia? This is Jane.
Sure. Yeah. Jane.
Yes. I have been very struck over the decades about how powerfully contemplative prayer, centering prayer, just bringing contemplation to modern Christianity has been through people like Basil Pennington and Thomas Keating and Richard Rohr, and seeing our great fathers like these passing away, to be quite honestly, and now Richard Rohr with his second bout of cancer and Thomas Keating just passing. My concern is, without these charismatic leaders calling us ever to the center, what are your thoughts about it? Do you think this is all going to drop off, or do you think it's going to continue? Or
no, I think it will continue. I do think there are still some really profound people out there. I mean, contemplatives. You don't hear as much of them, and some of them are not in religious life. They're laymen and women who really have. I think of Felina Hertz and Stoner to some extent, Cynthia Bourgeot for sure. But my task, I think, is and this is what I try to do as a teacher, is to really nurture the younger generations, towards a contemplative way of doing theology. In other words, doing theology from the inside out, really learning the practice of contemplative prayer, and then really just sitting with this mystery of God. I would not give up, although we have the big names. I would say that we will see others coming along. That's my hope anyway. I haven't seen anyone, recently. You're right, since Thomas and Richard. But I think we will. I do. I don't think like the whole, like the spirit of love has a narrow window of, these 10 people will do it.
Yeah,
I think God is so much. Yeah, but I appreciate what you're saying. I thought of it myself, we've had some tremendous spiritual leaders in the 20th century. Will we continue to have spiritual leaders in the 21st? And my inkling is to say yes, we will. But I would say keep a wide eye open, because you might find them in places you might not have looked.
Yeah, they may not come from. Cynthia Bourgeot talks about that they won't come from the monasteries like they used to.
Exactly. They're going to come
They're going to come from somewhere else.
Yep.
Because I feel really strongly everything you all have talked about tonight, transform the church from inside out, from upside, the bottom to the top. It can't come from the mind. It can't come from the words. It has to come from the contemplative heart.
Correct.
And if we're not out there teaching it, supporting it, and declaring its critical importance, none of these changes that we all cognitively are aware of are going to happen.
That's right. Yeah. And I think, maybe just to add to that, Jane, is that, do we know the mystical dimension of our own lives? Because I think everyone does have that mystical dimension, what Polycarp called the Christophanic dimension. We have it, I think for centuries, the church never empowered the layperson as one who would have a deep mystical center, that they could have, because that was always, quite honestly, a direct threat to the church. I mean, anyone who has a direct connection to God can't say anything, and there goes power and authority. So it is time, though, to tap into our own mystical dimensions, into our own mystical depth, into that Christ center within each of us. And so that would be my, in turn, that would be my challenge and my invitation to each of us to enter into that mystical depth, to the degree that we can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ilia, it's Bill Hart. Can I say something really quickly?
Oh, hi, Bill. Yes, sure,
Good
please.
to see you.
Yes.
So just two things. Yeah, great to see you. One other voice, and I'll email Gregory, is Vincent Pizzuto. He's a professor at University of San Francisco. Just wrote a book, Contemplating Christ.
That book is just excellent.
Oh, that's great.
He's a good friend of mine, and I'm sure he would happy to be joined a call, but he's just doing great work, and he had shared a personal story that I guess it was Keating's last book that he read. And anyhow, I just want to mention him because I know him personally, and I think he would love to be in a conversation with you guys.
And I wonder if he could
what was his
contribute.
Name?
Yeah. Vincent
Pizzuto, Pizzuto.
Okay.
And if you Google Contemplating Christ, the book just got released this year.
Okay.
And then I just wanted to report, Ilia, I know my school, I teach at Georgetown Prep. I know it's been in the news quite a bit. What I wanted to share was Ilia, many years, or 3 or 4 years ago, was on our campus. And, two things. One, I was struck by how many students were impacted by what she said. Yes, some admitted it was a little over their heads, but I continue to teach my seniors in spirituality Ilia's work, and Teilhard. I'll use these blog posts from Omega Center, and I'm just finding every year more and more students are like really open to it. And that combined with doing more silence in my classroom. Every Monday we go to the chapel and sit. This year in particular, I got more emails about how powerful the silence has been. So I just want to report to folks that, particularly at a place that's been in the news in a negative light, that yeah, I do think we've got to teach this to the younger generations. And I also think we don't need to wait to college. Like, it's the more we can expose, you know, young people to this, they're right for it. They are, their religious identities are so in flux. And, anyhow, so I thought I would just share that from my own context.
Wonderful, Bill. Thank you. I really appreciate
Yes.
that. Yeah, that's really wonderful. Very positive.
And hope to get you back there at one point, Ilia, if you come visit us.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ilia, this is Josh. I just have one question.
Oh,
and
yeah.
This is something I've been going back and forth between my Anglican priest friends. And, you know, I find like, you know, like we concentrate a lot of our focus on the fundamentalism of the evangelical right, like, the neoconservatives, I guess, on the other end of the spectrum. But I wonder, like, if there is not a sense of, outside of a sense of certitude, fundamental certitude, there can be a fundamental sense of unknowing. As you said, like, you know, an unwavering or incessant sense of querying of oneself and doubting. Maybe as a form of like really malignant agnosticism could be considered as something along the lines of that. I know that it's really emphasized in contemplative discourse, especially the practice of centering prayer is coming to the sense of the unraveling of the false self through the centering self. But do you think that one can get kind of stuck in unknowing in a way?
Well, you know, Josh, I think there's never a fully true, a whole unknowing. There's always, even the unknowing is a type of knowing, right?
Yes.
That
Yes.
way.
Yeah.
So I know what I don't know, and so it's a dialectic, so to speak. I think the thing with unknowing is this: we can either box that unknowing into a sense of a darkness, a sense of I'll never attain any deeper knowledge here, or we can just be at home in the unknowing. I think a lot of our lives as waves, if I can use quantum, we're always in the unknowing plurality of possibilities, right? We never know from one minute to the next, right? It's the same thing even in the deeper mysteries. We don't know how God is, or who that God is, or what that God is doing in our lives. And so we're always, I think, lingering in the unknown knowing, in the knowing unknowing. I think, what many of the mystics would say is that at the height of that, it's about a relationship. And I think, I might switch the category of unknowingness to an unknowingness in love. That it's a absolute depth of love that we can never really grasp or know, and yet we are known by it in the sense that as we move towards it, we feel less the need to hang on and this desire, in a sense, just to go into it, even though it's dark, even though we can't say exactly why or what's going to happen. And so there is a sense of the what do they call that? The learned ignorance, the docta ignorantia that Bonaventure said. Mystical darkness is paradoxically light. Mystical unknowingness is actually the depths of knowing. Knowing not by way of the intellect, but knowing by way of love. And maybe to answer your question is, I think maybe in our own time, I do think we need an epistemological, if I can use that way, an epistemological transformation from knowing by way of the intellect to knowing by way of love. And therefore resting in that love itself is an unknowing knowing.
Yeah, because Beatrice Brutto, my teacher, she talked about like knowing and loving, just like Teilhard de Chardin does. But I think it's more of it like a penetrable sense of consummation with one's beloved, right?
Exactly.
And in that sense of objectless love, like one comes into the sense of self-realization, I guess you would call it instancy.
Yes, exactly. And the thing is, Josh, is that I think this knowing in love always allows the beloved to remain in that with a depth of the mysterious unknown, right? In other words, you never want, because if you conquer that person in the knowing process, you actually would deplete, or you would lose the endless breath of their beauty,
Yeah.
you know, if I put it that way. And so there's actually our culture, culturally, you know, the unknowing thing is so countercultural, because we're all about positive knowledge, you know, what you can measure and see and know cognitively and explain. And yet true knowledge, as many of the mystics will tell us, true knowledge is not by way of cognition, it's really by way of the heart, right? And so it always leaves open the depth of the other with an unresolved question of that depth. Like, I can never grasp it, I can't control it, I must let it be in its endless depth. And that is where I can rest in that love.
Beautiful.
Linda, thank you. Is there anyone else anyone else here that would have a burning question or anything that I didn't address this evening? Because I didn't address a lot of the questions, but.
Is there a date for the November conference yet? Just a logistical question.
I think we said,
Save
Greg,
the
what
date.
time? Yeah, we
Well,
did.
we're throwing around a couple dates, but we still need to confirm it with the location. Likely going to be in the Philadelphia area, hopefully at a beautiful estate nearby, but we'll keep the details under wraps until we get things confirmed. But
yeah,
as I have definite information soon, I will reach out to everyone.
Okay,
and let folks know. Yeah.
probably the second or third week of November. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a former, you're an alum, right, Ben, of Villanova?
Yeah, I took classes there before I went to medical school.
There
I didn't
you
get
go.
a degree there, but I took some
Okay. All right,
physics
you're a partial
and stuff.
alum.
Yeah, I'm a partial. Right.
Okay, well, I think we have covered a bit. I mean, I'm sorry about the late start here, but you know, I think these Zoom conversations are a nice way, even as a community of people who are seeking a new narrative, a new understanding of the sacred and the spiritual and God in our midst to come together. So first of all, I want to thank you for taking the time this evening to be part of this Zoom conversation. Second is anything that you could do to support the Omega Center so we can keep the work going would be really greatly appreciated. And third is, I hope we can take time this, you know, as we move in towards Christmas. I mean, this tremendous mystery of you know, God made word made flesh, and what this means for us and our world, you know, and our world as it suffers through into something more than what it is. And maybe just reflect on our own lives, like, where are we in this word made flesh? Is this word, you know, is this word the word of my life? You know, I think we have to ask that. And can we be liberated by a God of love? I think that's a huge question for us today. You know, do we find ourselves constrained, confined, or liberated? So that would be my prayer for each of you as we move into Christmas, that you would be liberated in love and live freely in a creatively new consciousness, and not be afraid to do new things.
Thank you.
Because God is doing new things. So thank you.